to the Love Lab Podcast, a safe place to get real about sex. Whether you're a man, woman, single, or couple, this is the show for you.
We are your hosts, Kevin Anthony and Celine Remy, and we are here to guide you to go from good to amazing in the bedroom and beyond.
All right, welcome back to the Love Lab Podcast. This is episode 241, and it's titled, What is Consent and How to Do It Right? This has been a huge topic in the last couple of years. It should have always been a huge topic, but more recently because of, things like the Me Too movement or Harvey Weinstein, which was kind of all wrapped up in that, or, the Jeffrey Epstein stuff, like all these things that have been happening in the world that have been showing up as, wow, people are abusing power, they're abusing boundaries, they're not getting permission, all that kind of stuff. Because of all that, it's been a really huge topic. 50 Shades of Grey, that was another one that really brought consent up to the general public in the world. So it's an important topic. We have so much to share on this topic today. We are going to do our best to get as much information in as we can. That might mean we move a little faster at different times throughout this show or not. We'll see. If you're watching the video, you've already seen that I have a guest host on today who I'll be introducing in just a moment. But before I do that, quick note from one of our sponsors. Do you want to join the secret club of men who are great in bed? Then check out Power and Mastery. It is the most complete sexual mastery training for men. Whether you want to have harder erections, last longer, or increase your sexual skills, there is something for you at powerandmastery.com. If you're a longtime listener of the show, you know that is the men's sexual mastery course that Celine and I created. We have had amazing success with this course, not just in selling it, but the success that people have who go through it. I mentioned this in the last two shows, and I'll mention it one more time just because it's so amazing to me. But I had a student in one of the courses email us, as we often do. We get great feedback on the courses, but what he specifically told me was that he ended a 10-year dependence on Viagra after going through our course. And that is a major life-changing situation. So I can't talk highly enough about it. I highly recommend you go check out powerandmastery.com. Okay, so now that that's over with, I want to welcome and introduce to you all Ezra. You may remember him. He was on the show once before. Well, welcome to the show, Ezra, and please tell the audience about yourself.
Hey, thanks for having me. And my name is Ezra. I run the Ask Ezra Intimacy Coaching podcast. I'm the director of education at Sanctuary Studios, and I'm also author of the book Mind Fucking Mindfully. And I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, as I mentioned at the beginning here, we have a lot to cover because, as you pointed out when we were discussing this topic and we were working together to create this outline, it's a bit more complicated and nuanced than most people realize. And so we don't want to make it too complicated. Like we don't want to make it so complicated that people go, oh, fuck this, I can't do it, right?
Yeah.
So we want to try to simplify it, but at the same time, we want to make people aware of those nuances and why they're important. So let's just jump in and start with like the most simple, basic definition of consent. And I went to Merriam-Webster dictionary and just pulled the standard definition because it's just a place to start the discussion. So the definition: to give assent or approval, to agree, to be in concord in opinion or sentiment. Okay. All right. I think we all pretty much understand what that means. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what consent means to everybody else. So that kind of brings us to, consent is often described as something that is simple, but can be very complex. And there are a lot of paradigms around it. And so this is where kind of I want you to sort of step in and talk about how that is different to different people. And then we'll get into some of those different paradigms.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in case anybody's confused by the Merriam-Webster definition, like that is consent in all spaces. And when we're talking about sex and intimacy and relationships, we're talking about activities, right? We're talking about consent to do specific things with each other, to each other, at the same time, separately in the same room, whatever, right? Um, and I think that it is really easy to paint it in a black and white way, and that really there is subtlety, and that as many people who are bad actors, unfortunately, most of it comes from miscommunication and misunderstanding, and the vast majority of it, I would say. And that's because there are these different paradigms of consent, and one person's operating in one paradigm and the other person's operating in a different paradigm, and they just don't understand that they have different expectations, right? So, and most of our paradigms of consent come from either law or research or the medical field, right? So that's where these things have had to develop. So we can talk about implied consent versus explicit consent, or express is another way of saying that. And the difference there is explicit consent is you must say, yes, I want to do that thing, right? Or no, I don't want to do that thing, or I want to do everything but this thing, whatever. You're having that conversation. Implied consent is based on location or presentation. And you might say, oh, well, that's just whole hog wrong, right? But then, you hear about parties where there's a dark room, right? A room with all the lights off. And if you're in that room, you're participating, right? And there's nothing ethically wrong about that necessarily. It may be more vulnerable to mistakes or misunderstandings, but as long as everyone involved is operating under the same paradigm, then it's game, right? It's okay, right? But if somebody walks into that space expecting to have a conversation before somebody touches them, they're going to have a bad time, right?
Yeah. So I want to first go back to that point you made about people not really being on the same page, right? Like having different understandings of what consent means. Because I think that's a really important point. We do this, and not just in the consent world, but we do this in so many other ways. We have our own understanding of what a word or an idea means, and we assume that everybody else has the same understanding. And then, of course, everybody else is doing the same thing. They all have their idea and assuming that everybody understands it too. Interestingly enough, I learned this lesson really well simply because, Celine was, English as a third language, really, not even her second language. And so when you have a close, intimate relationship with somebody who's not a native speaker of your native language, or vice versa, you realize that definitions and meanings of words and phrases suddenly become a whole lot more important. Because when you grow up speaking a language, there's all these implied meanings of things, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That the other person doesn't learn because they didn't grow up speaking that language. And so for us, it became really clear to define what we mean by specific words, and there was one that we used to joke about all the time because I would often say things like, well, yeah, I'll be there in a few, like I would use the word a few minutes, or
Loosely.
Yeah, very loosely, right? and sometimes, like she would have this thing, but there's only two, she's like, why didn't you say two, as like the number two, as opposed to a few, because a few will apply. But that's just one of those subtleties of English language that we just kind of throw around. Yeah, few this, few that, few whatever, right?
Yeah. No, I'm with her, and as far as I'm concerned, you're wrong. A couple is two, three is a few, and four is several.
Yeah,
So.
well, technically that is correct, right? But see, and that's what happens is,
Yeah.
when she's learning English, more in a
An
scholastic
way.
environment,
Yeah.
an academic way, as opposed to just the sort of colloquial slang type stuff that we pick up when we're natives. You can
Yeah.
see that they're different, and that's just one example to illustrate to the audience how these things can happen, right? How you can have one definition of consent and what that means to you and what the rules of that consent are, whereas somebody else, because of their background and how they learned it, might have a completely different idea of what that means. And so that piece you mentioned about communication is huge. So when you're going to embark on this journey of consent, especially around doing things to and with and whatever other people, you got to be on that same page, and that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that it's really easy to paint implied consent as like these people are evil or trying to do bad. But then I want you to picture being in an intimate setting and having somebody say, "Can I touch you here? Can I touch you there? Can I kiss you here? Can I kiss you there?" It's gonna get exhausting. And so it's really typically a mixture, right? It's not, I mean, we can talk about these paradigms as theoretical, but they don't exist in a vacuum and they don't exist as pure entities. It's typically a mixture. And so, like another example might be like, okay, well, you have to ask me to touch my butt. But once you've asked me, you touch it anytime you want, right? Or once you've asked me, you can do that as long as we're in a private setting, right? Don't touch my butt in public, whatever, right? And so that's just an example of how you might use that.
Yeah, and we'll definitely dive more into more examples and all of that. And like, I'd like to come back now to the paradigms that you were talking about.
Yeah.
And the first thing I want to talk about, I mean, because you mentioned the paradigms already, although we'll touch on them again. But an interesting point that I wanted to get into, which is you started to mention sort of where these paradigms came from. And the thing is, they weren't born specifically for relationships and sexual encounters, right?
Yeah.
And so we're using a framework that was designed for other instances, and we're trying to apply it here, which may or may not work without some fine tuning. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. A great example of that is passive versus active consent, and that comes from research. So with passive consent, everything is a yes until it's a no. And with active consent, everything is a no until it's a yes. Right. And again, it'd be really easy to paint anybody who's interested in passive consent as, an evildoer, but it's just a different paradigm. Right. And it can be kind of tricky in research, too, in terms of the ethics of the situation. It's like, oh, well, you didn't say no to it. So, but at the same time, I think passive consent was really the dominant paradigm culturally until the 70s. And so really, it's petting turns into heavy petting, turns into sex. And if there's not a no along the way, it's been a yes the whole time. Right?
I think that's still how a lot of people operate. Like your average person who maybe wasn't involved in poly community or BDSM community or conscious sexuality community or sex party community, where those things are taught and really important. What I see out in the dating world is that's kind of the mode that most people are operating in. It's like, I'll try a little here. If I don't get a no, I keep going. And if I don't get a no, I keep going. And if I don't get a no, I keep going. Right.
Yeah. Try it and see what happens. Right. Is the mantra of the passive consent. And I think that works for a lot of people, but especially for people who are, recovering from trauma or are particularly sensitive, that's just a no-fly zone altogether. And I think that's probably why in BDSM we're so specifically focused on active consent, because number one, the things we're doing may be dangerous, and number two, a lot of us are dealing with, past experiences which were negative and made us more sensitive.
Yeah, and this whole idea of active and passive consent is, I think, really important in a lot of ways, not even just in relationship ways, but you're right in a sense that has been sort of that meaning the passive form of it has been kind of the dominant way. And you see that all throughout society. I mean, government does this all the time, right? Government just does stuff until you complain about it and say no, right? Like, so
dangerous turn to take.
Yeah, well, we don't need any better examples than the last couple of years on how that played out. But the reason I bring that up is because I think those are good examples of how dangerous that can be, right? How dangerous it can be to go down the road potentially of passive right? And just doing things until somebody objects, right? Because
Hmm.
that can create a lot of problems. But the other thing is, and you mentioned this a little bit too, neither of these paradigms is necessarily wrong or bad. It's all about what you've agreed to. So
Yeah.
and that therein lies the problem, is that if you're not agreeing to passive consent ahead of time, then you're likely to run into trouble.
Yeah, yeah. So let's take an example of a hetero couple, male, female. They're gonna follow standard gender roles. So the man is the one who is you know, taking action, right? Now, he might say to himself, "Oh, I should ask before I kiss her," right? Sounds fair. Now, if he asks to kiss her every time that he wants to kiss her, she might go, "This guy's a loser. This guy's a weenie. He can't take action." Right. And so it's because of this expectation that passive is okay after active, which I think happens a lot.
Yeah. So this is a great discussion, because this is something that a lot of men struggle with. Because in today's society, men that have done some work, some form of internal work, they're like trying, right? They're trying to have better relationships. They're trying to work on themselves, whether they're at the beginning of their journey or not. They realize to some extent that they need to ask permission. They need to get consent, but they struggle with, where is that line, right? That line between I'm asking too much and I'm not asking enough. Right. So maybe you could speak to the audience a little bit, like, how does a guy navigate that? How does he find out where that right place is?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm fully in the active consent camp, right? And so I think that there is wiggle room. There is like, okay, I'm going to be a little bit more passive with this person because that's what they require. But for me personally, I'm not going to be able to go way over into that passive camp, right? If somebody's like, "Oh, well, I don't want to talk about anything, like just try stuff," I'm pretty much just going to bail because that's just not for me, right? I need a little bit of reassurance that what we're going into, you're okay with, especially if what we're doing is dangerous, right? I'm not gonna do some of these BDSM activities without like a yes, I want to do that, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
there's a further conversation about like in what context, to what end, right? What if it goes wrong? What are we going to do? I talk about everything. And that can be totally sickening to some people. Some people just get totally turned off if you have to talk about it. And again, those people are valid, but they don't align with me. And it wouldn't be an option for me. And so I think that there's some amount of alignment that's necessary. I think you can move back and forth, but for me, having a meta conversation, having a conversation ahead of the conversation almost, and to say, "Hey, I'd love to touch your butt. Do you need me to ask every time? Or are we okay? Can I feel it out in this context? Can I touch your butt in public?" Like, I want to have all of that conversation so that I can have none of that conversation in the moment. Right. But I think that that's a hurdle that not everybody's able to overcome, right? That's a lot of conversation.
Yes. And I think, you know, there are different situations where different levels of this conversation may be appropriate, right? So, like, when you're
Hmm.
talking about, getting into the BDSM world and doing things that may be dangerous, I am in 100% agreement. Like, you got to talk about everything. Okay, this, how about this? How about this? What happens if this goes wrong? There's all that stuff that you just said. But what if it's not something that's dangerous? What if it's just, two people on a date and it's like, can I kiss you? Can I put my hand on your leg? Can I touch your shoulder? Can I, rub my fingers through your hair? Like, at what point does that get annoying, ridiculous? Because you mentioned that earlier in the show, that at
Yeah.
some point she's just going to be like, the fuck is wrong with this guy,
Yeah.
right? So so he's got to figure out, when is it right to ask, and then when is it too much, right?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if we can say that like quote unquote vanilla sex is less dangerous because you could have a baby and that shit is fucking dangerous.
Very true. Very true.
You could end up married. Oh my God.
It's just a
Uh,
different kind of danger.
yeah, no, I think it's challenging, and I think it really depends on the person, right? Like I think it you can imagine somebody who has a really hard time trusting, and they're gonna want more questions. They're gonna want more concerns. Other times it's gonna be more that person's gonna feel more secure, and the person's gonna have a uh more of an ability to say no in the moment, right? Whereas somebody who maybe isn't as able to say no in the moment, like the situation gets overwhelming and they can't voice words, like then you really have to have that conversation ahead of time because in that moment they're just going to freeze and then you've got regret, right? And I don't think anybody goes into this wanting to have regret.
Yeah, no, nobody goes into it wanting to have regret. And you are right that some people do freeze in the moment. And what's interesting is if you're listening to this and you're thinking about, well, yeah, okay, sure, if somebody's, tying me up to a cross and is about to, do whatever to me, like, yeah, maybe I would freeze, but that would never happen in a normal scenario. But yet it does, and it does all the time, quote unquote normal, right? I mean, whatever. But the idea is that it can happen just on a first date, right? When somebody wants to kiss you or touch your butt or whatever it is. And in that moment, you freeze up and you don't set the boundaries that you really wanted to set. And then you're like, why did I let him touch me there? Why did I let him do this? Or, so it's just important to know that that can happen in a wide range of scenarios. It doesn't have to be anything, crazy or dangerous. Like it's just even in simple situations, sometimes people don't feel comfortable or aren't able to voice it. And so having those conversations ahead of time are really important because you want to have those conversations when you can, right? When the pressure isn't on, when you're not in that moment, when you can actually talk about it rather than in that moment when you freeze up.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I mean, different people have different capacities. And so I don't think it's unethical for somebody to say, well, try it and see what happens, right? If that's what you agree to, then that's what you agree to, right?
Well, yeah, but the whole point is you got to have that conversation
Yeah,
first so
that's what I
that you
mean.
can agree to those
Yeah,
things.
between two people that you say that. I wouldn't say that to somebody to go and try that with the partner they haven't had that conversation with. But I think that if two people are having a conversation and a partner says, I'm not sure how I feel about it, but if you try it out, then I'll tell you how I feel about it in the moment, right? I think that's appropriate, even if it isn't active consent in the same way.
Yeah. So, I think back to that question of how does a guy find a line? I think really you got to have the conversations up front. What feels good for you? What would you like? Right. And then
Mm-hmm.
obviously let that person know that whatever you discuss or agree upon in that initial conversation is open to change if it's not working as you go along. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, in other words, as a guy, you might say, hey, you know, I'd love to have a discussion about, consent. Is it okay if I ask you for this or this? And once, we reach a certain level, is it okay if I don't ask as much? And then, of course, letting them know that, hey, if at any point this agreement isn't working for you, you need more asking, you need less asking, whatever it is, just speak up, just voice that so that I know what you need and then I can adjust to that.
Yeah. And I think that there's a barrier of the of like self-confidence. I think that sometimes asking can sort of imply a lack of confidence, right? And the way to overcome that is to reframe the conversation as you are taking charge of the consent conversation, right? Because
Yes.
now your partner wants you to be in charge, and now you're doing that. You're having that conversation. And I think a lot of people feel like it's a buzzkill, like it's a boner killer, but this could be a very sexy conversation.
Yeah, that is a criticism that we hear a lot. Like, oh, it's not spontaneous. It takes us out of the moment, and it's a boner killer, and it's not fun. But how much of a boner killer and how much is it going to take you out of the situation if in the middle of this amazing moment, your partner freaks the fuck out because you did something that they didn't like?
Yeah, and I think
and then how much worse is that with the trauma that and the lack of trust that will create?
yeah, well, and I think that's why I want to front load the conversation. I don't want to have any conversation during the experience besides maybe some check-ins, right? But I've asked all the important questions ahead of time so that once we get into it, I can focus on being present and reading body language and connecting with my partner, right?
Yeah, I always find it weird when I hear that that excuse from people about, well, it's not spontaneous or it takes me out of the moment, because they'll use it not just for consent issues. They'll use it for a lot of conversations that you should be having in the beginning, when you're first dating somebody, and of course all along the way. But it could be anything from like, well, what do you want to get out of this relationship, right? Why are you here? What are you looking for, right? And these are all things that people just want to completely ignore and not have those conversations because they're difficult. Maybe they don't want to admit what the actual answers are, right? And so they just avoid having those conversations. But the reality is let's say I meet somebody new, and what I'm really looking for is, a sexual playmate as opposed to a long-term relationship. Let's say I don't voice that and I just kind of, let it play out as it plays out. Then we end up with, oh, there's bonds being formed, there's attachment being formed, and now somebody gets hurt. As opposed to, hey, what if I just took the time to discuss that in the beginning? Like, hey, here's what I'm looking for. Here's what works for me right now in this moment. Are you okay with that? Now, that doesn't guarantee that you're not going to have attachments and someone's going to get hurt, but it's going to significantly reduce that, right? And so the consent conversation is similar in a sense that you should be having this conversation right up front in the beginning so that everybody is at least on the same page to start with, and then you can readjust as you go along.
Yeah, I'm totally on board with you. And it's tough because I think the expectation of having that conversation is not always there. And, we talked about these BDSM spaces, sex positive spaces, polyamorous spaces, where there's the culture of expecting that conversation. But when you're going into a relationship and they don't have that experience, it can be a little jarring to be like, hey, I brought my 22-page sexual interest survey to date number one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to just use an example that has nothing to do with sex or relationships, but
sure,
it's going to sort of illustrate the point I want to make, which is that, I used to do a lot of rock climbing. I was really big in the rock climbing world. And when I was climbing a lot, I've climbed all over the world. I was climbing at a really, really high level. And so what happens when you are climbing at that more sort of high elite level of climbing, you completely lose touch with what it's like for the beginners, right? And so you'll see this a lot with guys that put up routes, that bolt routes or create new routes, right? They'll give it a rating. And the rating is usually like 2 or 3 grades higher than what it actually is, because in their mind, it's just so, yeah, it's just easy. It's that simple thing. And they have no concept of what it means for somebody new coming up who's just starting, and they get on this thing. They're like, ah. And so the reason I bring that up is because this conversation we're having, it's like, in my mind, because I spent so many years, around polyamorous and sex positive communities, it's sometimes hard for me to imagine that this would be that difficult for people, that this would blow their mind. Like if somebody showed up with a 22-page sexual interest survey on the first date, I'd be like, oh, this is probably going to go well. Right?
Yeah, we're really going to find what meshes. Yeah,
exactly. But that's you're right. That is a completely different paradigm. That would blow most people's minds, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it does. I see it a lot. Because I do have a 22-page survey that it has 590 items. So
that's a lot. Do you send that to them ahead of time? It's like my my naturopathic doctor is a 30-page thing you have to fill out before you see him for the first time.
Yeah,
do you send it to them ahead of time?
No, I think that's a terrible strategy. This is like date 3 kind of thing. Like, okay, if you're serious, if you really want to get weird, then let's talk about it. I think handing that to them on the first date, I would have a much lower success rate, I think.
That's pretty funny though.
You're like, listen, I want you to know this relationship is going to be a pain in the ass, just like this paperwork. So,
right, not starting out on the best foot there with that one. Oh my God,
yeah.
22 pages. That reminds me actually of another funny story with Celine and I. So when we first agreed to go out on a date, and we hadn't been on an actual date yet, like, I don't know, 4 days or something before we're supposed to go on the date, she sends me a message and she says, we need to talk, right? And you know that classic, like the woman comes to you and says, we need to talk. And I read the message and I went, we need to talk. We haven't even had a date yet. What do you mean we need already? We're already in that we need to
You're
talk.
already in the doghouse.
We haven't even had a date yet, right? And of course, it turned out to be something totally fun that she just didn't want to write in a text message, right?
Yeah. There's the language barrier. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but it was just funny, like that whole thought. Because you're saying, like, if you gave them that 22-page survey on the first date, they'd be like, what? Like,
what is going on? Yeah.
Nobody wants to hear the we need to talk or the fill out my 22-page thing before the first date.
yeah you got to find out how awesome the person is first, and then it's worth the work.
There you go. Let's talk a little bit about since we're talking about sort of what consent is and on all the different paradigms and all of that. One of the things that you put in the note was Planned Parenthood's, I guess they call it FRIES acronym for consent.
Yeah, I love that.
Step through that, because I think it's actually really good and people should know it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do believe that they came up with it. Planned Parenthood came up with it, but they don't officially take credit. So I wonder. But it's FRIES, FRIES, and F stands for freely given. R stands for reversible, I stands for informed, E stands for enthusiastic, and S stands for specific. So I think that does a really good job of capturing the current sex positive culture of consent.
Yeah. So freely given, right? So you shouldn't be coerced in any way into giving your consent. It should be something that you give freely. Reversible, which is what we've talked about several times already, about sort of renegotiating as things go on. Like,
you can take it away, right? You can say,
right.
I said I was okay with it, but now that we're trying it, I don't like it. I'm done. And if it wasn't reversible, your partner might say, well, too bad you already said yes. And that's not cool.
No, that's really not cool. That is really not cool. And that's the idea of, sometimes you don't know what you don't know when you start something, right? Which means that you might agree to something because you think in your mind that will be just fine. And then later on you realize, ooh, that just doesn't work for me. So you have to be able to reverse it or renegotiate it, or whatever term you want to use. Informed, that's an important one. Not to get too far down the government rabbit hole, but this is one government doesn't understand at all. In other words, they don't ever actually inform us properly, and they expect us to make decisions without having the actual information at hand to make a responsible decision. So that's not something that you want to do. So by informed, right, what we're talking about is you have all of the information you need to make a good decision.
Yeah. And that's the one I get pushback on when it comes to the mindfucking education. So there is this, people like a surprise often. And so how do you maintain a surprise when you're asking, can I do A, B, C, D, and E, right? You can ask for A through Z and only plan on LMNOP, right? And then it becomes a surprise.
Yeah, so there's other ways to do that while still getting the consent part in. Yep. Enthusiastic. Yeah. Well, you should be, for lack of another term, but enthusiastic about it. You should be happy to give your consent, your freely given, reversible, and informed consent. And then, of course, the last one is specific. This one is hugely important. If you're not being specific people can go, well, I thought that's what you meant, or I thought you agreed to that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that can look like, do you want to have sex? And then what exactly sex is or what activities are on the table are not discussed, right? If that was absent. And I should say too that there has been a little bit of pushback around enthusiastic, specifically because some people are, through life experiences or medications or whatever kind of conditions, just incapable of enthusiasm, right? And so they proposed alternative is embodied. And so
Okay.
the question is like, are you ambivalent? Is part of you saying yes and part of you saying no, or is your whole body saying yes? Right.
Yeah.
And
Now that's the key right there. And that's
mhm.
why in my mind, I was searching for another word than enthusiastic, but I couldn't come up with one quick enough. So I just kind of moved on from it. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you have to be jumping for joy, but it is what you just said. You have to be a full yes. Like your whole body has to be in agreement with what you're actually saying and agreeing to.
Yeah, and you can be ambivalent. It just kind of means you're not done with the conversation.
Well, yeah, you can be ambivalent, but you shouldn't move forward from a place of ambivalence, right?
Yeah,
It,
exactly.
it
And
means you take more time.
yeah. I mean, and you can even go into say, look, I don't know if I'm going to like that. I'm willing to try it. Let's do it. I do want to try it, but I really don't know if I'm going to like it. And as long as you've got reversible consent, then it's kind of okay.
Well, yeah. So I would say you are enthusiastic about trying it, right?
Sure.
You're
There
like,
you go.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm enthusiastic about trying this. I'm just not guaranteeing that I will like it or want to continue doing it. Yeah.
exactly.
All right. We are a little over halfway through the show. I want to take a quick break for our second sponsor, and then I want to get into, why is consent important? We've touched on it, but I want to like really clearly lay it out why this is super important. We want to talk about what is an empowering yes and an empowering no. Uh, Maybe get a little bit more clarity on the difference between implied and explicit consent, although we've covered that a bit. Yes, we want to talk about things like blanket yeses, consensual non-consent. That's another interesting one, and a few other things. So, like I said, we got a lot to cover in this show, so we're trying to get through it as best we can. All right. Second sponsor. Hey guys, do you know what makes a man great? You know the kind of masculine man that women are irresistibly attracted to and want. Is it money, job title, his physical body? Is it being great in bed, a big penis, great pickup lines? What if you don't have those or only have some of them? What if you've had a string of failed relationships, are embarrassed by your bedroom skills, doubt whether you can rise to the occasion, worry about lasting long enough, or are always stuck in the friend zone? Then I can help you. If you're ready to make big changes and finally become the man you have always wanted to be, then this is the program for you. This is my men's coaching program. And you can find it at CelineRemy.com/go/warrior. Link is in the description. That's CelineRemy.com/go/warrior. We discuss all kinds of things from sexual skills and how to be better in bed, right up to exactly what we're talking about today, which is consent type stuff. Believe me, men, the beginning of that ad says, what makes a man great? One of the things that makes a man great is knowing what he wants, having respect for women, asking for it, communicating it clearly, all of these, what we sometimes call soft skills. These things women absolutely love, and they will respect you and they will crave you when you show up as that kind of man.
Absolutely. I get the most common question I get is how can I be sexier? How can I be more attractive? Consent. It's two things. It's self-knowledge and communication.
Yep. Great stuff. All right. So let's get back into the consent conversation. And let's just cover a few of the points that we put down here for why consent is important. So you want to start with that one? What's number one on that list? Not that they're necessarily in any order, but
yeah, well, we don't want to force anything on one another, right?
yeah, very,
Yeah.
very important. So number one reason why consent is important, because we don't want to force anything on anybody. We want all of the interactions we have to be consensual. And that's how we avoid misunderstandings. That's how we avoid creating trauma. That's how we avoid, breaking actual legal laws and things like that, right? Like we want to make sure everybody is in full consent to everything that we do. Next on the list is we don't want to abuse any involuntary power imbalance. That's an interesting one. Now, there's a very obvious physical power imbalance between men and women, right? So that's one. Typically, not always, but typically. But that's also not the only potential power imbalance. There are others, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If one partner is exceptionally more attractive than the other, or has more resources than the other, or more experience than the other, then those all can have a power influence on the relationship. And I think it's unreasonable to expect somebody to have a total power neutrality relationship. Like that just almost never happens, right? So there's gonna be some power imbalance. And so how do you be mindful of that and make sure that you're not taking advantage?
Yeah, so some power imbalance, which sometimes we could maybe even refer to as polarity in a relationship, is okay. But yeah, anything that is in what we would say an involuntary or too great of an imbalance can potentially be a problem. So hence consent comes in. If we have consent, it mitigates a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned physicality. If one person's 5 feet and the other person's 4 feet, then maybe the 6 foot person should reassure the other person, say, hey, look, there's gonna be you're not in any physical danger, despite how easy it might be for me.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
here, we'll negotiate. You hold this knife, so it's evened out.
Yeah, well, so there's another discussion that we will not go into in this show, but there is a reason why we have certain rights in this country, and uh, uh, fixing power imbalances is one of those reasons. That's all I'll say about it for this show. Okay, next on the list, we want everyone to be a full yes to all the activities.
Absolutely. Yeah, we don't want ambivalence. We don't want, because that means they might end up regretting something. So you want everyone to be fully into it. And also, if this happens a lot of this, like, oh, I did it to you, now you have to do it to me. So anytime you say have to, you're pressuring somebody and you're not getting voluntary consent. You're not getting freely given consent. You're getting coerced consent.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, this is something unfortunately I see in a lot of just regular plain heterosexual relationships with men and women where, the guy's like, well, I did this to you. Now you got to do this to me. Now you got to finish me or whatever it is. And boy, we try everything we can to unteach that, to unlearn that from people, because no, there's never any, I did this, so you have to do that. That doesn't actually exist. Next, neither you or your partner will have regrets. So that's what you just said. You don't want people. There's nothing worse than having an amazing, sexual encounter, and then the next day or a week later or a month later, having the person say they regretted it. Like, you never want people to walk away feeling that from any encounter that you've had with them.
Yeah, and I think you can't eliminate that as a possibility. We can't tell the future, but establishing fully informed consent and all of that is going to minimize it.
Yeah, and you're right. You absolutely can't. I mean, I can remember years and years ago, I was at a sex party, interacting with two women, and one of them literally grabbed my hand and shoved it down her pants and like wanted me to touch her. And I was like, well, okay. I mean, we didn't actually verbalize, is this okay? But her grabbing my hand and shoving it down there is a pretty good sign that she's okay with that. But, a week later, she calls me up on the phone and it's like, I wasn't really okay with that. And which at the time, and this is many years ago, so I didn't have the same framework, and knowledge and experience that I have now. But I was kind of blown away by it because I'm like, but you're the one that grabbed, like, you're right, So you're right. We can't actually make sure that that's not going to happen at all. But what we're trying to do is absolutely minimize that for sure.
Yeah, this next point is really big.
Yeah, go for it.
Sex without consent is illegal.
Yes. Yes, it is. I believe they have a term for that. It's called rape.
He said it, folks. The R word.
The R word.
Yeah. No. And I've heard jail sucks.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And, aside from that, again, it's like, this is something. There was somebody in the sex positive poly community here in Southern California, who said something one time at the intro to a party that I really liked. And what the point he was trying to make was that, if your partner, let's say you're there with a partner, or let's say you're there and your partner is at home, and you want to do something, but you're not sure if it's okay. Like, let's say there's somebody that showed up at that party. You went to the party and your partner said, yeah, it's fine. Go to that party. Have all the fun you want, but I can't go this time because of whatever. I got to watch the kids, whatever. And then you get there and somebody shows up at the party that you really want to have sex with, but you didn't actually negotiate with them that was okay. So the point he was trying to make is, hey, there'll always be another party. There'll always be another opportunity. Don't feel like, this has to happen right now, or it's never going to happen, or I'm going to miss the opportunity, or this or that, right? So when we're talking about sex without consent is illegal, keep in mind that there'll always be another, like, there's never a need to force anything, right? You're always better off just erring on the side of caution and saying, you know what, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to coerce. I'm not going to do this, because one, it's wrong. Two, it could hurt somebody. Three, it's illegal, whatever. But there'll always be another opportunity for it to happen in the right way.
Yeah, as long as you don't spoil the pot, so to speak.
Right. Which you could do by trying to force it and then having it not actually happen anyway. And now you've just ruined any chances that you potentially have.
Yeah.
All right. Last one on the list. The best sex is fully consensual sex. Yeah. This is always an interesting one to me too, because I always think to myself, like, why would you want to have sex with somebody that doesn't want to have sex with you, or that isn't into having sex with you? Like, it's not even fun to me at that point.
Well, and I think maybe even if it's like a question, like, are you really going to be able to get into it if you're not sure if your partner is into it?
Yeah. Yeah. And, this is something I've talked about this on the show, and Selena's talked about it on the show as well, about, like, when you're younger, especially as a guy, you're younger, you've got massive testosterone raging through your body. You're horny. You want to have sex all the time. And, the act of having sex is a little bit more important to you maybe than the actual connection with the individual itself. And so when you're younger, you're more willing to have that kind of sex that's like super unattached, or doesn't share the love or the consent or that kind of stuff. But as you get older as a guy, you have less and less desire, for at least most men do. That's not true for some that haven't really matured and grown up. But as we get older, the connection with the person becomes more important than the actual sexual act itself. At least it has for me, and I know it has for a lot of other men as they age as well. So the idea of having somebody who's not a full yes suddenly becomes like really not very interesting. It's not even something you really even want to do.
Yeah, I'm all over this next one here.
All right, go for it.
Yeah,
Do it.
yeah. Empowering a yes and empowering a no. So I previously in my last life was a salesperson, and they always want to tell you empower the yes, empower the yes. You want to have a good time, don't you? You want to have a great podcast episode today, Kevin, don't you? Now, and I've got you to say yes, right? So I'm almost like priming the pump of yes. Now, in sales, they never say anything about priming the pump for no, but you really ought to, right? So we don't want to have a bad time today, right? No, of course not. We don't want to offend anybody. No, we don't want to offend anybody, right? So like I'm asking the simple question that sort of helps you say no. And it doesn't even have to be so tricky, right? I can say, Kevin, I really want you to feel empowered to say no today. I'm going to ask you a silly question, and you're going to tell me no. You can practice telling me no. Can I feed you gummy worms? No. Yeah, there you go. Awesome. Great. That's not even what I was interested in. And now we can have our conversation. And so, I think that's really important, is to make sure that that person can say no. And sometimes they can't. If they can't say no, then you're going to have to find other ways to communicate. right? You're going to have to say, okay, well, if I don't get a solid yes from you, I'm assuming it's a no.
Yeah, right. And so that's exactly what's written in the notes here, right? Yes means yes, no means no, and maybe means no. So if you
Yeah.
don't get that hard yes, you just have to assume it's a no.
Yeah. Well, because a lot of people who have struggle with no's, they could say maybe. And for those people, maybe means no. And if some people feel differently, then they can tell you otherwise.
I think probably everybody has had some experience with that where they've been, not necessarily even in a sexual context, but where they've been asked, like, do you want to go here or do this? Or like, you want to come out to this thing? And you're like, maybe. But what are you really feeling inside, right? You're really
Mm,
feeling a no, I don't really want to go to that thing, but I don't know. I don't want to disappoint them, whatever it is. So then you give them this wishy-washy maybe answer, right?
hmm
So I think everybody can kind of relate to how that feels when you say maybe when what you really mean is no. Now,
hmm
for the person asking, they can't feel what you feel inside when they hear your maybe, right? Maybe if they're really intuitive and they're tuned, they might be able to feel it, but they don't feel what you're feeling inside when you go, maybe, right? So for them, they have to assume that that maybe is a no. All right. Um, I think since we're getting kind of long in the show, I think we've already done a pretty good job of covering the difference between implied consent and explicit consent. So I'm going to skip that part of the notes here, and let's talk about two other things that are um, part of the consent conversation that maybe don't get talked about that much, that I think people should be aware of. So the first one is blanket yeses. Now, the reason why I want to bring this one up is because you will often see things happen that appear that the people are not getting consent, when in reality they've already negotiated it and they've already got these what we call blanket yeses. So you'll see this a lot at sex parties where somebody will go, well, I watched those people and they didn't do the thing that you said we're supposed to do, right? Or they're over there, they didn't do it, right? Well, maybe because they've already talked about it and they have what we would call a blanket yes. So maybe you could explain to people what a blanket yes is.
Yeah, and I think we all do it, right? Because again, you're not necessarily expected to ask if you can kiss somebody forever, right? So now you've got a blanket yes for that. But it's less explicit. I think oftentimes we will have these conversations of, again, can I touch your butt? Great. Can I always touch your butt? Can I touch your butt in private only? Can I so so you can get consent to do something under specific circumstances, under all circumstances, whatever, as long as that's what you all have agreed to, then that's blanket consent.
Right. And so how that'll often go is like, yeah, you'll ask to say, "Hey, can I kiss you?" Just as a simple example. And somebody said, and then the person will say, "Yes, and for the future, you don't have to ask me again. If you want to kiss me, you can kiss me." Right? Now, that may be negotiated between two people who aren't actually partners. And now you see them in a public context at a play party or just even a regular party, and he walks up and kisses her without asking or doing anything, and you're going, oh, I see how it is around here. It must be okay to just walk up and kiss a woman that you think is a beautiful woman, right? Like, no, you have to understand that there may
Yeah.
be what we're calling a blanket yes, which is a pre-negotiated, hey, I've already given you permission for this, and that permission stands until or unless I say otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, and another example is I had a partner who did not want to hear "let's have sex." Just could not. Just it was a total turn off to start the conversation like that, right? And so they were like, "Oh, just initiate, just start, and I'll tell you if I'm not in the mood," right? And so that was a blanket consent, and it was in a relatively vanilla relationship.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, the important part is that you communicated that, you discussed that, and you understood what those boundaries are. But yeah, now if somebody were viewing that from the outside, they might get the wrong idea. And so that's why it's kind of important to understand the blanket yes thing is, one, it's a tool that you could potentially use, so you want to know it. But two, you want to understand that what you might be observing from other people in environments might not be a lack of consent, but might already be a blanket yes or some pre-negotiated consent. Why don't you talk about consensual non-consent?
I love it. Of all the topics we have left, you pick the edgiest one.
I
Yes.
know, and we
No,
have
I'm
very
happy.
little time to cover,
No, I
but I
get it.
just
Well, and the first thing I want to do is normalize consensual non-consent, rape fantasy, force fantasy, whatever you want to call it, is the most common fantasy across cultures, right? So every culture surveyed on what the common fantasy is, that was number one. Number two was gang rape. So kind of number one and number two, right? So head and shoulders above the rest. It is a really common fantasy. And having that fantasy doesn't mean that you want to be sexually assaulted. It doesn't mean that you want to sexually assault somebody. It's that fantasy is arousing, right?
Mhm.
So got that out of the way. So consensual non-consent is when we play with the idea of not consenting, right? So if my partner wants to say no, stop, don't, but they really mean yes, that's great, keep going, then that's consensual non-consent, right? And we talk about safe words a lot, and safe words are for consensual non-consent because in a situation where no does not mean no, right? You can have a conversation ahead of time and say, look, I want to just say no the whole time, right? That's consensual non-consent. Even if your partner's like, no, 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 but they're actually having a great time and they're into it and they want to keep having fun. That's consensual non-consent. You can also have one where the person is like pushing, right? Sort of like pushing you back, pushing you away. And then that sort of plays into that role play of this is unwanted. And I think one of the things that makes it so attractive, number one, it plays with a very real fear that I think we all have of losing our agency and losing control of our bodies. But it also plays with this concept of like freedom to have that desire, right? Freedom to have a fantasy. Like, let's say, I want my feet licked, right? But I'm ashamed of it. And I can't, I have a hard time asking for it, or I have a hard time sort of lining my sense of self up with that activity, right? But if I say, okay, now I want you to hold me down and pretend it's non-consensual and force, tie me up and then lick my feet I'm not consenting to it. Now it sort of frees me from that narrative that might play in my head that prevents me from really enjoying the experience.
Yeah, and so I think the key word in consensual non-consent is the very first one, which is consensual. So I love the way that you described that. I think you did a great job of it really explaining what it is and the different ways that it can show up. So I don't need to really say any more about it than that. I really just wanted that to be introduced to the audience in case they haven't heard of it before, so that they're aware that such a thing exists. And again, if you are watching something, right, externally, and you see that happening, it's easy to misinterpret what you're actually seeing. And so it's important to understand that such a thing like this actually does exist. Okay, there's still so much more, but we really are out of time. The last thing I want to cover is
I was going to say, you're just going to have me on again. That's all.
yeah, there you go. It's been a great conversation. So yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I want to just leave the listeners with a bit of a framework for consent. And it's the very last thing on the notes here, which it starts with: have a conversation before the activity starts where you can map out what your yeses, nos, and boundaries are, right? So everything on this list is we've talked about already, but we've talked about in separate little pieces. And so now I want to bring it all together and kind of lay it out real clearly. Like, here's your sort of step by step. So the second one, create a contract or agreement. And it is a good idea, especially if you're dealing with some very nuanced boundaries, to write it down. Write it down in black and white where both people can read it, and then make sure that you both understand the meaning of the words that you used when you wrote that down. Next on the list is have a safe word, something that you briefly mentioned, but we didn't really explain to people? Maybe you could talk real quick about safe word.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think that we just talked about how defining language is important, right? So a safe word is something that means to stop the activity entirely, right? So if I say pineapple, then no matter what we're doing, we stop, right? No matter how far, how deep we've gotten into it, we stop. And many people use a second safe word that means like ease up or switch spots or give me a second, right? And so the most common is the traffic light system. So green means go, red means stop, and yellow means proceed with caution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when it comes to safe words, it's a good idea to have an unusual word that wouldn't normally come up in the context of what you're doing so that it really stands out. Like when you hear it, you know exactly what it means.
My safe words are more and keep going.
As long as you've
They're
negotiated that.
They're not. It's a joke.
All right. Next is all partners agree to stop immediately for whatever reason, no matter how deep you are in, if any partner calls for it. That's really, really important.
Yeah. And if no means no in your setting and there's no ambiguous stuff, you don't need a safe word. You can just say, stop, I'm done. Yeah. But it may be helpful because things are so crazy that, things can get crazy. And then to hear red, okay, we know that means stop. There's no confusion. Mm-hmm. So you may want one anyway.
Yep. And then lastly on the list, when in doubt, ask. Communicate. Super important. If you are unsure about what something means or whether you should continue or whether you should stop, you need to just ask. All right. So any last things you want to say, Ezra, before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I want to tell people to check out the Ask Ezra Intimacy Coaching podcast. I think we're around 41 episodes deep. So check that out. Also, Sanctuary Studios is reopened in their new location in Los Angeles. So if you're a local listener and you're interested in a dungeon experience, check out sanctuarylax.com. And I'm also doing a research project. I know I didn't talk about it hardly at all, but it's called Radical Sexual Acceptance. It's a new coaching intervention. And if you're interested, you can volunteer. And for the mere price of doing a couple surveys, you can get 4 hours of free coaching.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Ezra, and for really going into that topic in a really good way. I think we went just deep enough to give people a good framework, and just know that this conversation can go a lot deeper. And if you're interested in that, working with somebody like Ezra or even myself is a great way to go deeper into that conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me, Kevin.
All right, everybody. That is all the time we have for this episode, and I will see you next week. We hope you liked this episode of the Love Lab podcast. If you enjoy this show, subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends.
And for more free, exclusive content, join us in the Passion Vault at CelineRemy.com/vault. That's CelineRemy.com/vault.
Thanks for listening.
And remember, you're amazing.